Hello, let's talk about gouache, my favorite art supply ever. Since we're always on the lookout for something more budget friendly, let's try some MEEDEN gouache. So if you don't know what gouache is, it's basically super pigmented watercolors. That means that you can add water into it and dilute it to make it less opaque or use less water to have it be more opaque. Pretty simple, but it's really cool because you can reactivate it once it's dried with water, so you have little to no waste with gouache paint, as opposed to something like acrylic that will dry in your palette and you will never be able to reactivate it. And the reason I wanted to try out these MEEDEN ones specifically were because they were so much cheaper than the ones that I usually buy, which is this Holbein gouache, which I love with all of my heart. It's the best. It's so great. I cannot say enough good things about this paint. But if I did have something negative to say about it, it would be that it costs so much money. Like probably an arm and a leg and maybe a kidney could probably get you a full set. I'm not sure. It may even just get you a half set. I don't know. I'm not super aware of the going price for kidneys, so pardon me. But realistically, if you were trying to set up a full palette like I have now, it could cost you hundreds of dollars, and that can be intimidating, especially if you don't know if you even like the medium. But at the same time, it could be a little bit of a predicament because you might not like the medium if you try something super cheap. So what the heck are you going to do? I'll tell you what I would do if I had to start all over and I had a limited budget. I would definitely go try these MEEDEN ones because for the price, they're actually very nice. They surprised me a lot, actually. But I must also first say that before you go out and try to buy any gouache, you should be aware that there are two different kinds of gouache, which is traditional gouache, which is the one that I am using where you can reactivate it with water. But there's also another kind of paint called acrylic gouache, which is just really a dumb thing to call it in my opinion because it's actually only matte acrylic paint. So if you go and buy that and you think that you're going to be able to reactivate it with water, I am so sorry to tell you, but you are not. And you're not going to have the fun experience of having all the textures of watercolor like you can with this gouache. So just be aware. This MEEDEN gouache is available in a few different size sets of paint, which is pretty nice. I think I got one of the smaller ones just to try it out because I didn't want to invest all this money if it wasn't good. One thing that always irks me or annoys me, I guess, about buying sets of paint like this is that the white tube is always so small and it's just never enough in my opinion. And I would have gladly given up one of these greens in exchange for another white or something similar because I am going to blow through that so fast. I can't even begin to tell you. I also really don't like that this set doesn't have a good orange because if you have been painting at all, you know that orange can be a little bit difficult to mix with yellow and red. I know it sounds simple, but to get like a really bright, nice orange, it's kind of difficult, if not impossible. All the while this set has 4 different kinds of blue. Like, was that necessary? I don't think so. One of the first things I noticed about this paint compared to the Holbein expensive gouache was that it is way thinner. So when I squeeze out a little dollop, I hate that word, of paint onto my palette from the Holbein, it's like super, super thick. Like, I don't even know what to compare it to, but it's thick and you have to use water to really make it usable. But this kind of comes out of the tube like acrylic paint, which was interesting. And I just knew that it wasn't going to be as opaque once I added water because it was already pretty thin. And I was right because it did end up not being as opaque as the expensive paint. But you know what? To be fair, it's way cheaper. It's totally usable in my opinion. I would be happy if I had this when I first started gouache. I would have loved it so much more than using that stinky jelly gouache. I hate that stuff. That stuff is totally not the same as regular gouache. I don't know what it is. It's just not fun at all to use. It's different. At the same time, no hate to anyone that really actually likes that stuff. I just don't understand how you can use it and get good results. It's just, I watched a video about how it's more similar to oil paint, and that totally tracks because I don't like oil paint either. Going back to this gouache, because we're not talking about jelly gouache, this gouache was leagues better than that in my opinion. It was more opaque. It was smoother. You're not going to have to worry about it molding in the tubes like you do with the other stuff. And you'll probably get better at mixing your own colors because you don't have everything pre-mixed for you. Price of this MEEDEN gouache is actually very good for what you're getting in my opinion because it was less than $20 for this 24 set, which if you were trying to buy tubes of Holbein gouache on their own, you could get less than 3 tubes. Granted, these tubes are a little bit smaller than the Holbein ones, but the Holbein ones are starting at around $8, 8 something. So you definitely aren't going to get as much paint if you spent the same amount of money on the Holbein ones. So I think that this set is a great little starter set if you want to just try out the medium. I think that this would be better than most things you could get in the price range. Then you can also get a 48 set, which is double this size for, I think it's $23 right now, which is not bad at all because this paint is genuinely enjoyable to paint with. But also at the same time, the paper you use with watercolor or gouache is pretty important. You need a cotton paper. You can use cold press paper, which is a little bit more textured, or hot press paper, which is a little more smooth. In this video, I am using a cold press paper because I do like the texture, but you are able to get better details with a hot press paper if that is your thing. I like using colored pencils on top and it's definitely easier to get more details with colored pencil on a hot press paper, but like it's not the end of the world to try to get details on cold press paper, but just keep that in the back of your mind. If you are struggling to get the details you want, maybe you need to switch to hot press paper. It seems like cold press paper is more available, I've found. So if you've ever gone to the store and just blindly picked up a watercolor pad without checking to see if it was cold press or hot press, you probably got a cold press one, which the watercolor paper can get pretty expensive. The Arches one that is the best, absolute best in my opinion, is like 12 sheets for $20 for a 9x12. $20 if you're lucky. Sometimes it can be a little bit more. But if you are really trying to keep your budget low for this, I really enjoy painting on, this is going to sound crazy, I really enjoy painting on the Five Below watercolor pad. It's specifically the one with like a light blue background on the cover and like I think it's a toucan on the front. I don't know what kind of paper that is, but it's really good. It's like actually kind of similar to like a mix between a cold press and a hot press paper. So it's not super textured and not super smooth. I love painting on that. It's so beautiful and it makes me feel better to not spend so much on the paper and I can practice it without feeling guilty. The paper I'm using in this video is actually the MEEDEN brand, which is, I'm gonna say, actually surprisingly good for how cheap it is. And I've heard a lot of other artists say the same thing. So if you are willing to wait for it to be delivered or pay a little bit more than the Five Below one, I would definitely recommend this one because it's just really nice for how cheap it is. Okay, now back to the paint. I was having a lot of trouble actually trying to mix a green because I think it's important to not only test the paint colors straight out of the tube, but also their mixing ability. And I was a little bit disappointed in the mixing ability between the yellow and the blue. And I feel like you should at least be able to get a little bit of a green without it looking too muddy. You know what I'm saying? So it failed in that aspect for sure. I was expecting more and I was a little bit let down by that. But since there are so many greens in the palette and blues and other colors, you don't really need to have all that mixing ability straight up in the beginning, I guess. It would be so nice if it did, but since it doesn't, I don't know. I guess I'm just going to have to use it straight out of the tube and do minimal mixing, which kind of sucks. And I think it could be a very much wasted opportunity for a beginner artist or a newer artist that doesn't know about color mixing to be able to learn how these colors mix together and stuff. And it's just kind of not, that's not going to happen for anyone, I don't feel. And I do think it is so important for artists to learn how to reliably mix colors together because you're not going to be able to always get the specific exact color you want out of a tube. So you do need to be able to know how to mix the colors together to get what you want. One of the worst things about this palette for me personally is the fact that you cannot buy individual tubes if you run out of one, which really sucks because you are going to go through that white so fast. Mark my words. Trust me, I know. Okay. You're going to go through that white in like 2 minutes. I really wish these cheaper art supply companies would start letting you be able to buy individual tubes or like individual paint marker colors because it really does suck. Like I don't want to use that product anymore because suddenly I have to have a whole new set to have one of my favorites that I use the fastest. That sucks. But when I started painting with this paint on an actual painting, I really did enjoy it. It is a little bit less opaque than the more expensive paint, which is to be expected. I think I mentioned that already, but I didn't have any trouble with it at all. I was really happy with my ability to be able to get the watercolor texture similar to the more expensive gouache. This is one of my favorite things about gouache and watercolor is the pretty textures that are unpredictable. So that is totally a requirement 100% for me, which is nice because, you know, when you use water with some of the cheaper gouache or definitely the jelly gouache, it gets totally streaky instead of getting less opaque. Another negative thing with the MEEDEN gouache is that you are in no way, shape, or form able to see the light fastness, which is how long the paint will last once it's on paper and out in the sun, which you are able to see with more expensive brands. So you could be painting this and it could be here today, gone tomorrow, and you just have no idea. Whereas the other more expensive gouaches do have a little chart that shows you how the light fastness is compared to each shade. You can just tell that a lot more money, love, time, and expertise has gone into the more expensive gouache. I feel like if I was painting at the same rate, with the same number of paintings, the same size, with both of these paints, I think I would go through the MEEDEN one way faster than I would the Holbein one because it does take a little bit more to get the same effect. The water has more of a effect on the MEEDEN one, so you are able to thin it out quite quickly, whereas with the Holbein one, you can add quite a bit of water and it will still be opaque. So in other words, a little bit goes a long way with the Holbein, so you do end up using less over time. Both of these paints do give a really pretty matte effect, which is a hallmark of gouache paint, so if it did not have that, I would be a little bit suspicious of it, I guess. The colors are nice and vibrant in the MEEDEN set, and they do continue to be nice and vibrant when you put them on the paper. I didn't encounter any weird like flaking issues or anything like that, but then again, I also do not use my gouache as thick as some people do to ever experience that. So take that with a grain of salt, I guess. If you use your gouache like I do, where it's kind of more thin watercolor-ish, I don't think you will ever have an issue with that. The MEEDEN paint on the palette when it was dried did look a little bit weird. It was flaky kind of, so if you did layer up your gouache a lot and make it super thick, I think that you may eventually have a problem with the MEEDEN one, but I don't know if that's even realistic or not. I have not tried it myself. So I guess in conclusion, I would say that I would be thrilled to have this MEEDEN set as a more beginner artist, or if I was trying gouache for the first time, as opposed to some of the cheaper ones that I tried, which I really struggled with. I'm so glad that I persevered to try the good stuff, the Holbein, because once you have a taste of the good stuff, it's really, really, really hard to appreciate anything that's cheaper because it's just so beautiful and nice. So if you are looking for a cheaper alternative to just try it out, or if you're on a budget, definitely try the MEEDEN. But if you do have the money to splurge and try the Holbein, I would definitely recommend the Holbein because it is just leagues better in every way and nothing can hold a candle to it. It is the holy grail paint for me, and I just cannot find anything ever that compares to it.